Open wide for some soccer!
Hello guys, it's 899 here and welcome to today's video where today we're going to be going through our tips and predictions for round 1 of the Hyundai A-League season 2025-26. After a lot of months away in the longest off season possible, we're back here for the start of the new season as we look to get underway, and it's honestly pretty interesting time for Australian football. With lower league teams re-entering the public consciousness like Heidelberg United's run in the Australia Cup and the addition and start of the Australian Championship, there'll be a lot of eyes seeing how will the A-League compare as the ever-seething gap between the lower leagues and former NSL clubs and the current A-League starts to get a lot smaller. It'll be very interesting to see what storylines we get from the beginning, but without further ado, let's go into the first week. Kicking things off on Friday night, we have Adelaide United taking on Sydney FC. Now, these two teams last year were in a battle for the final place in the finals, which was won by Adelaide United, who ended up 6th, pipping Sydney FC by 1 point. Adelaide United certainly looking to return to the finals, but probably higher up as we see the return of Craig Goodwin back to the squad, while Sydney FC, with their pretty decent star player, are obviously wanting to keep pushing forward and eventually making the finals, because I believe that's pretty much a bare minimum for them at this current moment, because they do have a pretty good squad on paper. It's just about getting it to capitalise. Obviously, being a brand new season, not a lot to figure out with these squads, but Adelaide United just about short favourites to beat Sydney FC in this game. Like all the other games coming into this year, you need to get off to a good start. So in terms of how I think this match will play out, I actually think this will be a draw. I think there'll be a couple of goals in this, maybe like a 1-1 or a 2-2, but yeah, very hard for me to try to pick out a winner from this game. And then we go later into the night on Friday as we have the Brisbane Roar taking on the Macarthur Bulls. Macarthur were one of the teams in the mix to try to get themselves into the finals after coming off winning the Australia Cup in the previous year, but unfortunately they just dropped off a little bit and eventually lost by about 5 or so points, whilst Brisbane were in kind of dire straits, finishing second last, only getting 5 wins that year. But there has been some decent signs by Brisbane to improve. They've actually had a pretty darn decent pre-season and a new coach in Macarthur. However, Macarthur have also got some pretty decent players. They've got Anthony Caceres. They've also brought in Damien De Silva. He also Ji-Dong Wong, who is the player that scored the infamous Sunderland goal over Manchester City back in the Premier League. I think it's going to be pretty important for Macarthur, especially to get a good start to this season. Obviously, with their schedule being kind of being thrown in the mix because of them being in the Champions League 2 competition. But I think with the decent signings that they have made, I think that despite Brisbane looking pretty good in the preseason, I think they're just a little bit off Macarthur at the moment. So I'm going to say I think the Bulls get the win over in Suncorp. And then we move on to the Saturday matches where at 5 p.m. we have Western Sydney Wanderers taking on Melbourne City. The Wanderers had a decent season last year, finishing 4th, however would lose their only finals match to Melbourne Victory, who would eventually go on to the grand final, and they would play the opponents for the Wanderers in Melbourne City, who came second and would eventually go on to win the A-League, beating their crosstown rivals 1-0. City, I do think, are going to be pretty much the standard bears for this season. I mean, they've been absolutely brilliant last year. They obviously got the victory in the grand final last year, and I feel like this would be interesting to see where the Wanderers currently are, because obviously they've had, they've made the finals pretty consistently, but they just haven't been able to, get that finals victory, which they are desperately looking for. But the Wanderers have made some decent signings. You've got Castor Barbarousis, who I think has been at every club so far. You've also got Steven Ugarkovic from Melbourne City. That'll be interesting. Philip Kankar, Alu Kowal, Ruan Tongnik, and Angus Thurgate. Those are pretty decent signings. Honestly, that's a pretty, we're kind of going to make it a bit of a threat here. But despite those signs, I think it'll be quite interesting. Could be close, but I think Melbourne City should be too good, and I think they will get the job done with a victory. And now we go to the 7:35 match on the Saturday of Australian Eastern Daylight Time. I should stress this, as it is the Melbourne Victory taking on Auckland in a rematch of the semi-finals from last year. Auckland very much impressive in their first season in the A-League, winning the minor premiership. Unfortunately, they were stopped in New Zealand by Melbourne Victory, who had advanced to the grand final, whilst Victory obviously beat them in that decider. And honestly, from 5th, did really well. Beat the Wanderers away. won over in New Zealand to get the job done and get to the grand final, but again losing to their crosstown rivals in Melbourne City. A bunch of players have been promoted into this Melbourne Victory side, and it's going to be interesting to see how they do hit the ground running. Whilst Auckland has also brought in a couple of players, including the likes of Lachlan Brook and Ollie Sale. But yeah, not really that much to this. Alex Pawson now no longer their goalkeeper. So yeah, it's going to be Ollie Sale, which will be pretty interesting to see if he will step up into this Auckland side, which I think he's got the capability to do so. Obviously, I think there might be a bit of feeling, especially after last year's semi-final series. But I think it's going to be a draw. I think it's going to be pretty even. Might be a bit fiery. Could be a red card. Who knows? But yeah, I do think this will be a draw between both Victory and Auckland. And now we go to the other side of the country as we have the distance derby. It is Perth Glory up against the Wellington Phoenix. Perth Glory, unfortunately, last season just had a season to forget. Only 4 wins that year and eventually finished with the wooden spoon. Wellington, not really that much better to boast about, finishing in 11th. As they only got 24 points. So pretty much it's both teams definitely looking to improve. Perth have brought in some players. However, they've got Brian Kaltak from the Mariners. They've also got in Callum Timmins and Mark Birighitti. Mark Birigitti's back, ladies and gentlemen, and that's pretty lovely to see. Whilst there's been a couple of movements there by Wellington Phoenix, including the likes of Nikola Meliuznic and Remy Nazarin, I feel like this is definitely looking to be a possible launching pad for Perth Glory to get away from the wooden spoon. And in terms of the betting odds for this game, Perth Glory are the biggest favourites of the whole round. But yeah, I feel it's definitely a fair amount of promise with the signings that Perth have made. And I'm going to say I think they hit the ground running strong. I think they get the win in the distance derby over the Wellington Phoenix. And now we move on to the final match of the round as we go to Sunday afternoon, as it is the Central Coast Mariners against the Newcastle Jets. It is the F3 derby. Both teams sort of in similar positioning, with the Jets coming 9th with 30 points, whilst the Mariners came 10th with 26 points. Pretty even split in terms of the F3 derbies last year. The Mariners won the first one at Unite round. There was a 2-2 draw on the second one, and then the third one, the Newcastle Jets won 6-0 over the Mariners. But I think a very important emphasis has to be on the preseason, because I think both teams could not have had more polar opposite of preseasons. The Central Coast Mariners are kind of in a bit of stray. Like, it's pretty safe to say there's a lot of rumours and talking about coming behind the scenes of the club, to the point where one of the biggest news coming into this game is the fact that their coach, Max Jackson, has left for another opportunity, which has seen the Mariners scramble to find a new coach only a couple of days leading into the first match. Which, as of recording this on Wednesday afternoon, it was this morning where it was revealed Warren Moon would be the interim head coach of the Mariners. But in the Newcastle Jets preseason, Mark Milligan has come in as coach, and I'm going to try to say this without trying to be smug as I get rid of my Newcastle bias in this. But they won the Australia Cup. They've now qualified for Asia for next year. So yeah, very positive pre-season from the Newcastle Jets as they come into this season. But there has been a bit of the stigma about teams that win the Australia Cup don't necessarily do that great in the season, which a lot of people have predicted, and honestly, it is a very fair point. But it'll be very interesting to see how this game does go about, because obviously form and outside news doesn't really matter in a derby. However, I'm just not going to not tip the Jets in this. I'm going to say the Jets are going to win the F3 derby. Why would I say the Mariners would? It goes against my mortal philosophy here, but I think the Jets will get the job done. And that is the end of my predictions. There's also a video coming out in the next couple of hours, which you probably will see on my other socials, talking about my challenge for charity, as I'm going to be running 1 kilometre for every goal scored this A-League season to raise money for Beyond Blue. It should be a short uploaded, and we'll probably link to this at some point. But yeah, there's a link in the description below to see what the plan is. It shows the donation page or whatever. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.